Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Reddit Gaming Tech.com video, we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. And this is a very AMD-focused video because, quite frankly, there is so much news today, which is unusual given it's a Sunday, but because of the sheer amount of AMD news, if I included other news as well, it would end up being like a 40-odd minute video, so I'll probably cover that tomorrow. But we're going to start things out with lots of news for AMD's GPUs. A couple of days ago, I did cover that there are reports that AMD are planning to launch a GPU which has 4096 stream processors, which is obviously a significant jump from what we currently have. Well, we have updates to that, plus many other things besides. So the question is then, will AMD create a GPU based upon the RDNA architecture which is capable of deep learning operations? Well, according to Kamichi on Twitter, the answer is probably yes. Kamichi has had a very good track record in the past, particularly with Radeon-based products. For example, he was the first person to reveal the shader layout for RDNA and that it would be a SIMD32 based architecture. Those details plus many others turned out to be 100% correct. So according to Kamichi and his discoveries, we will see GFX 10, which is a Navi architecture that we already know, so let's say the RX 5700, RX 5700 XT, so those would be products under the GFX 1000, GFX 1010, and GFX 1012. We'll discuss more about those in just a moment. Furthermore, we will see GFX 1011. So GFX 1011 would be Navi architecture and DLOP. The only thing that could logically be, because DL in computing almost always, in these instances anyway, references deep learning, which of course is an extremely profitable market. Now, there's a couple of things that we need to discuss before we move on to the further analysis of this. The first is that this is quite interesting because AMD have said so much in various earning calls and also conferences about them wanting to really focus on the deep learning market. But the second thing is we've also learned so much about Arcturus recently. Arcturus, up until just a couple of weeks ago, was a complete and utter mystery. We'd even at one point thought it might be the SoC APU for the upcoming Xbox. Remember that whole supposed dump that we saw of the Xbox development kit, and this image now is obviously fake, but it was actually referencing itself to be Arcturus, and some other rumors said it was a successor to the Navi architecture and so on, but obviously all of that stuff just turned out to be completely and utterly wrong. Instead, it is actually a Vega-based GPU, which has the graphics IP blocks removed, but some other tweaks. But we've discussed that several hundred times in the past, but I just want to try and give some context before we proceed. So the question is then, what market would this be for? I hate to bring it back up, but it does remind me actually of something that my source did tell me back in March. This is the same source who told me that ray tracing was going to be for the second generation of RDNA GPUs, although back then of course it was just known as Navi, that we would see a almost a split in AMD's product portfolio for graphics. One would be focused purely on like compute, which is what looks like Arcturus is going to be, and he did tell me in kind of a brief mention, that we would see a variant of Navi, or I guess RDNA now, which is going to be for the prosumer / professional market, and he did give an example of something like a Radeon Pro, so maybe this is for that, or possibly it could be eventually also adopted for other things. I'm not saying this generation, but maybe the successive generation, so I guess RDNA 2, maybe we would see some deep learning capabilities there, much like we do for NVIDIA now. After all, while the ray tracing cores are very important, obviously, for, well, ray tracing, the tensor cores have their place too. So possibly AMD are kind of putting the seeds in for that, but for now anyway, these are going to be for specifically for like prosumer work. But we're going to have to wait and see. whether this is actually accurate or not. Although, what is quite interesting is Kamichi also said that what is the purpose of describing Navi DL purposefully if Navi 12 is not a big GPU? And he also said that this is device ID 736000 is already running, so he expects that this is going to be a product which is going to be announced at CES. So this is not going to be a product that is going to obviously be on store shelves over the next couple of days or anything like that, but still. So the second piece of the RDNA puzzle that we're going to be discussing today concerns the 4096 shader rumor. So I discussed this a couple of days ago, but just as a quick refresher, the current cards from AMD have far fewer shaders than 4096. They actually have 2560 in, let's say, the case of the RX 5700 XT. So clearly, if you bump this number up to 4096 shaders, that is a substantial increase, in theory anyway, in raw compute performance. And according to Kamichi, he's been doing some digging, and also I've spoken to another source who does not want me to tell them to say who they are, and they also kind of backed this up, although didn't go into as many details as what Kamichi is. And they've said basically that according to all of their information, there is definitely a big RDNA GPU that's coming. So Kamichi has said that without question a 4096 shader GPU is coming, but other rumors actually tell us that this might not even be the biggest GPU that AMD are actually creating, and we may see one that's up to 5120 shaders. Now that is a lot of shaders. That's, well, if you're bad at maths, it's twice the number of what we have with the RX 5700 XT. Unfortunately, the release date for this is a little murky. A couple of days ago I mentioned that the 4096, according to the original posting, was supposed to launch later this year, maybe the fourth quarter. There's certainly a lot to take away with this, because if this is accurate, it could mean that we will see an RX 5800 as well as 5900, and AMD will be able to almost even create possibly XT and vanilla variants of each of those cards. So for the sake of argument, you could potentially have, let's say, a GPU that has 4096 shaders be the RX 5800 XT, and then maybe like 3584 shaders be the 5800 vanilla, and so on and so on. And obviously they could also use different memory configurations depending on the bandwidth requirements. So for example, you could maybe go with a 320-bit bus or something like that for the RX 5800, and potentially up to a 384-bit bus if you are designing the 5900. And they could also go with faster memory as well. Rather than the 14 Gbps, they could potentially clock up to like 1500 MHz or even 1550. My only concern is, sorry, not 1550, 15,500. That makes much more sense. My only concern is, though, that I wouldn't want them to really release this much later than the very early like part of next year, because otherwise I think we're not going to be too long after that until Nvidia start to prepare to launch the GeForce 30 series. I don't have a specific release date for that. I don't have like a link to tell you about the release date for GeForce 30, but we do know that Nvidia are definitely going to be launching, of course, GeForce 30 next year using the 7nm process. Most speculation and murmurs I've heard is that it may not be that Ampere is for us like home users. Perhaps Ampere is going to be a little bit like Volta, so maybe we get like a Turing refresh, or maybe we get a specific version of Ampere. Who the heck knows? I don't think anyone really cares, to be honest, what the architecture is necessarily, as long as it's just, well, faster than what we've currently got for a reasonable price. So hopefully Nvidia have learned their lesson from the launch of the RTX 20 series, and also, with any luck, if AMD can launch a very competitive card, and to echo what I said a few days ago, in theory, a 4096 shader card, as long as it's not starved with memory bandwidth or anything else, in theory, it could be extremely competitive to Nvidia's current GPUs. So yeah, let's just wait and see. So the next piece of AMD news is a patent that was recently discovered, and it has a publication date of June 27th, so about a month ago, 2019, but it was originally filed 2 years ago, well, just slightly under that, December 2017. I'll read the abstract first. The title for this patent is Extreme Bandwidth Scalable Performance per Watt GPU Architecture. And the abstract is, and I quote, a technique for accessing memory in an accelerated processing device coupled to stacked memory dies is provided herein. The technique includes receiving a memory access request from an execution unit and identifying whether the memory request corresponds to a memory cell of the stacked dies that are considered local to the execution unit or non-local. For local access, the access is made directly, that is, without using a bus. A control die coordinates operations through such local accesses, activating particularly through silicon vias associated with the memory cells that are included to the data for the access. Non-local accesses are made up via a distributed cache fabric and an interconnect bus in the control die. Various other features and details are provided below. And once again, the applicant was, of course, Advanced Micro Devices in their Santa Clara office in California, although the inventors are from a couple of other states. So, before we go into this, there are a couple of things that we need to understand. The first of which is that this patent, much like all patents, doesn't necessarily equal to a final product or a product that will ever, make it to reality. It could just be a theoretical thing or something that's screwing around within the lab, but some particular reason, maybe they can't get it working right, maybe the yields are terrible, maybe it, forces them to make their coffee in the morning in the reverse order and they have to put the milk in first into the, into the kettle or whatever. I'm just, making up something silly. Whatever reason, the patent just never comes to a real product. The second thing is that this is designed to be fairly ambiguous and as loose as possible, as all patents are. So it doesn't necessarily mean the implementation is going to be 100% how we see it here. So let's make our way through the patent, and we're going to start off on page 9. I know that sounds a bit weird, not going through it in order, but it makes the most sense. So page 9 gives us a flowchart, and flowcharts are handy for us to be able to understand things. So basically, you receive an address and an access type from an execution unit. Then it identifies the memory cell in the stacked die which is associated with the address. And then it comes to a question. Are any identified memory cells local to the execution unit, the ALU, the shader, whatever you want to call it? If the answer is yes, it will access this local memory through the stacked die via a bit line through the silicon vias without utilizing the bus. We'll look at the silicon vias and other bits in a moment, I promise. If the answer is no, then it moves on to the next potential question. Are any identified memory cells non-local to the execution unit? No, then it will go to the end. If the answer is yes, it will then access a non-local memory cell via the cache infrastructure and bus in control die. Right, so now that we know what we're looking for, let's scroll up another page and let's look at sheet 8. And it has a diagram of exactly what's going on. So you can see that it's almost split up in like a pattern here. You see the MCs, and they have the BLTSVs, which go straight through the selectors and then directly into the various SIMD unit. Now obviously this would be multiple layers. In fact, if you scroll up a little bit, you can see multiple stacks of memory die. They've got 1, 2, 3, 4 stacks of memory die, which is on top of a control die, which in turn is on top of the APD. But going back to this particular reference here, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory how most of this works. Basically, it is quite literally proximity based. Wherever the closest memory cell is, closest to whatever the SIMD unit is. Obviously, that would be the execution unit requesting directly from that memory cell, basically finding out whether that piece of data is local to that memory cell, so it doesn't have to farm things over the memory bus, which would have multiple improvements in performance because A, it would reduce latency, B, it would reduce, well, bandwidth issues, and C, it would also in theory reduce heat and power consumption as well. And it's also kind of ties in terms of TSVs as well, with the TSV cooling method that I covered a while ago. So it's really interesting that all of this stuff is finally starting to pop out on the internet. But perhaps we actually will see this come to light in a real product, because there's actually a bit of text before the detailed description. And this is extreme bandwidth scalable performance per watt GPU architecture. And 0001, this invention was made with government support under Path Forward project with Lawrence Livermore, National Security, and I'm not going to read out the contract stuff because you can see that yourself, awarded by the DOE, Department of Energy. The government has certain rights in this invention. End quote. So this is potentially something like the Frontier computer, the Frontier supercomputer that we've heard so much about, which of course is, amongst other things, a joint collaboration with AMD and also the Department of Energy. Indeed, AMD have been talking quite a lot about this recently. Lisa Su was recently on stage discussing it. In fact, if you look back over the slides, it mentions for the supercomputer, that is Frontier supercomputer, which is a joint collaboration of Cray, AMD, and DOE as well as others. The first slide that comes to mind is custom AMD EPYC processor optimized for HPC and AI. It utilizes future Zen core high-performance architectures and is AI optimized for supercomputing workloads. So clearly that is not in reference to a Zen 2 based CPU. That would not be Rome. That would be Milan or potentially something even later. So either Zen 3 or Zen 4 based. And indeed, if you look through the other slides that have been made public, AMD of course have released them for PR moves. We see high-performance GPU optimized for high-performance computing and AI, HPC custom compute engines, extensive mixed precision ops for optimum deep learning performance, high bandwidth memory, HBM, for maximum throughput. So it's possible that this particular implementation is being tweaked and changed for high bandwidth memory. And finally, Infinity Fabric, high-performance, low-latency interconnect between CPU and GPU, custom coherent fabric, and finally it connects 4-to-1 these GPU and CPUs per node. And obviously there are multiple of these nodes which come together to form the supercomputer, so each node is connected on a network, and well, yeah, it kind of goes from there. With any luck, you've enjoyed the video. If you did, then you know what to do. Like the video and also give it a share as well on social media because, well, that helps us out a ton. You can also subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all recent new subscribers as well as people who have stuck with us for some time now. It's very humbling because I realise that you dedicating 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes or whatever of your day to watch our content is, well, an investment from you. So I'd just like to thank you for doing that. You can also find us on social media, which of course is linked right down there below on the video description. So, follow us if you've not already done so. With that said, take care of yourselves, have a great day, bye for now.